What if everything we've been told about how human civilization began is actually mistaken? Around 6,000 years ago, a mysterious culture in what is now ancient Iraq appeared to leap across thousands of years of development in what seemed like no time at all. Astronomical references, a moon, a star, various symbols, some of which could even resemble something like a wristwatch, all pointing to technology being used 6,000 years ago. Now, with the help of artificial intelligence, their long-forgotten clay tablets are beginning to reveal something far more extraordinary. Have you come across any of the new scans where additional petroglyphs were discovered? Yeah, there's going to be so much more like that turning up. People are going to be able, what is all of that? References to cosmic cycles, sophisticated technology, and genetic information. And once you hear what artificial intelligence has just uncovered in the most recent translations, it will genuinely surprise you. The strange civilization. What if the story of how human civilization got started isn't what we've always believed? 6,000 years ago, in a region nestled between two mighty rivers, something unfolded that continues to puzzle historians to this day. In present-day Iraq, where the Tigris and Euphrates wind their way through the land, an entire civilization seemed to emerge, almost out of nowhere. They referred to themselves as the Black-Headed Ones. We know them today as the Sumerians. Here's the thing, though. This wasn't a gradual crawl up from hunting and gathering. Other societies required thousands of years to develop writing, legal systems, and an understanding of the stars. But in Sumer, everything seemed to burst into existence all at once. Small villages transformed into sprawling city-states, Eridu, Uruk, Ur, and at the center of it all was mud. Not just any ordinary mud, though. The Sumerians recognized a potential in it that no one else had seen. They fired it into bricks and constructed entire cities from it. They shaped it into containers and tokens used for trade. But the truly remarkable breakthrough was this. They used it to preserve memory itself. They invented cuneiform, wedge-shaped impressions pressed carefully into clay tablets. And that shift altered absolutely everything. For the very first time, human beings were able to preserve their thoughts in a lasting way. Not merely grain tallies or tax records, though those certainly had their place, but royal proclamations, agreements, verses, and complete narratives, stories capable of surviving their authors by thousands upon thousands of years. And here's something worth noting. When they began putting numbers down, they went all in. They worked with a base 60 system, and the remarkable thing is, we're still carrying that tradition forward today. 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour, 360 degrees in a circle. That kind of mathematical sophistication was pressed into clay tablets an enormous number of years ago. But this is where things take an unexpected turn. The deeper scholars dug into those tablets, the more surprising their discoveries became. Tucked in among records of barley deliveries and brewing instructions were mentions of ritual healing practices, peculiar notes on celestial movements, even hints of understanding that appeared remarkably advanced for its era. Now jump ahead to the present day. Tens of thousands of those clay tablets are housed in museums and storage facilities scattered across the globe. But actually reading them has proven to be an enormous challenge. A single tablet might contain more than 1,000 distinct signs. Each of those signs can carry entirely different meanings depending on the surrounding context. It once took researchers the better part of a lifetime just to become reasonably skilled at interpreting this material. Only a very small circle of specialists could even attempt it, and that's precisely where artificial intelligence enters the picture. Over in Munich, a team of researchers began applying machine learning to digitally reconstruct shattered tablets. Picture it as tackling the oldest and most demanding jigsaw puzzle the world has ever seen. Initially, the system could only match broken pieces together, but it improved rapidly. Before long, it was recognizing patterns in the writing, isolating individual texts, and even reading across the work of different scribes and distinct styles that stretched across whole centuries. By the year 2023, research teams at Tel Aviv and Ariel University had developed an artificial intelligence capable of translating Akkadian, the language found on many cuneiform tablets, into English in nearly no time at all. Work that once demanded years of effort could suddenly be completed within hours. As Big Think described it, the technology was something like merging Google Translate with a time machine. And right as this tool was becoming remarkably capable, archaeologists hit upon something extraordinary. Fresh excavations brought to light tablets in such exceptional condition that they could function as reference texts for confirming the accuracy of the AI's translations. Up in northern Iraq, at a location known as Kurd-Kalstan, researchers uncovered a collection of tablets estimated to date back to roughly 1800 BCE. That said, scholars believe these were most likely copied versions of even more ancient originals. Around the very same period, another location, Girsu, considered one of the earliest Sumerian cities, yielded more than 200 untouched cuneiform tablets alongside 60 cylinder seals. The remarkable detail here is that these discoveries had been preserved inside bitumen-lined containers, which shielded them from moisture and deterioration over the centuries. And since the content of these tablets referenced events from even earlier periods, many historians now believe they carry knowledge stretching back to the very beginnings of Sumerian civilization. Yet the story showed no signs of slowing. By 2025, new instruments developed at Versberg University were pushing boundaries even further. Researchers could now identify idioms, specialized terminology, and layered meanings that human translators had overlooked for generations. So what exactly were these texts communicating? As it turned out, those peculiar astronomical notations were far from random observations. The tablets contained detailed records of planetary movement, solstices, and even suggestions of Earth's precession, a gentle, slow wobble in the planet's axial rotation that modern astronomers only came to fully understand in relatively recent times. So were the Sumerians actually monitoring cosmic cycles spanning tens of thousands of years? The evidence strongly suggests they were, but the story didn't end with the stars. The discoveries kept unfolding, one after another. In the realm of medicine, the tablets laid out antiseptics, methods for treating injuries, even techniques for reading the pulse. They captured family health records in ways that hinted at an awareness of traits passed down through bloodlines, something formal genetics wouldn't catch up to until much later. And then things took an electrifying turn. Quite literally, certain tablets described copper and iron containers submerged in acidic fluids. The language used currents, sparks, a powerful luminous glow. Ring any bells? The so-called Baghdad battery, an ancient artifact uncovered many thousands of years later, lines up with that description almost perfectly. Were the Sumerians playing around with electrical forces thousands of years before anyone else? Whether it happened by chance or by intention, they were writing down processes that align in an unsettling way with concepts we consider modern. But the biggest surprise wasn't purely scientific. Some of the most unusual and troubling references in those tablets speak of stones that scorch the ground and poison the soil, buried far below the surface to keep their harm contained. Today we recognize desert glass, fused quartz shaped by tremendous heat, possibly from meteor strikes or something harder to name. Could those ancient stones be related? Certain researchers believe they might be. Others speak quietly of vanished technologies or destructive forces that resist straightforward explanation. And that's the point where mythology comes crashing through the door. The Anunnaki, chances are you've come across that name already. In early Sumerian tradition, they were cosmic arbiters, beings of a spiritual nature. But in contemporary fringe theories, brought into the mainstream largely by Zecharia Sitchin, they transform into ancient astronauts. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki arrived from a faraway planet known as Nibiru more than 400,000 years ago. Their purpose was to extract gold from Earth. And to accomplish that, they supposedly shaped humanity as a workforce through deliberate genetic engineering, far-fetched perhaps. But here's the thing. The AI is beginning to catch some unusual technical vocabulary buried within these mythological passages. References to energy vessels, divine codes, sealed chambers with breathable air, terms that feel a little too precisely engineered to simply wave away. But let's park that thought for just a moment, because we'll be coming back to it shortly. And those terms once believed to describe sacred boats or flying chariots, they're now giving up details like airflow systems, enclosed cabins, and protective outer coverings. Are we actually looking at distorted records of ancient technology here? The further the AI pushes through these translations, the harder that line is to see clearly. Before we go any deeper though, if you haven't already hit that subscribe and like button, go ahead and take care of that real quick. Show some love before we keep moving. But the Sumerian story isn't only about the stars and celestial vehicles, it's about us. And those tablets don't quietly hint at human origins, they proclaim them. Texts like the Atrahasis and the Eridu Genesis don't hold back. They state plainly that humanity was not born from chance or shaped by nature, but rather brought into being through deliberate design. Here's how these tablets lay it out. There was an all-out uprising among the heavens. The lower-tier gods, known as the Igigi, had grown fed up with endless physical toil. When they finally rose up, the higher gods, the Anunnaki, urgently needed someone to fill that role. Their answer was to fashion an entirely new kind of being, one that would follow instructions and shoulder the hard labor. And how exactly did they manage that? According to the tablets, by shaping a human from clay and something referred to as divine essence. They gave this first created being a name, Adamu. Sound familiar? You're definitely not the only one noticing that. The echoes across later religious writings are honestly difficult to overlook, but that's still not the strangest piece of this. Apparently, these early humans were far from perfect at first, unable to reproduce, not particularly sharp, essentially unfinished. So what happened next? The process was repeated again and again until they finally landed on something that worked. Humans capable of reproducing and actually putting in labor. Now, this is the point where things start feeling less like ancient folklore and a whole lot more like some kind of controlled experiment. Thanks to AI, researchers are now pulling phrases from these old texts like essence mixture, prototype yield, and reproductive capacity. And naturally, this is exactly where ancient astronaut theorists really start paying attention, pointing to modern genetic curiosities like the unexpected fusion of human chromosome 2 as possible remnants of ancient manipulation. Did some outside force tamper with our biology? Mainstream science says absolutely not. But the conversation, well, it is nowhere near finished. And when it comes to outside visitors, here's where the story gets truly polarizing. Nibiru. Yes, that one, Zecharia Sitchin's notorious theory. He argued the Anunnaki originated from a faraway planet traveling on an enormous looping path, one that requires 3,600 years to complete a full journey around the sun. According to his interpretation, they first arrived somewhere around 450,000 years ago. And each time Nibiru passed close to Earth, it set off waves of civilizational collapse and rebirth. Now, believe it or not, here's what's worth noting. Sumerian tablets do actually document catastrophic events, enormous floods, severe droughts, sweeping climate disruptions, and they frequently connect these occurrences to unusual celestial phenomena, crimson skies, rivers flowing in reverse, stars described as preying upon the land. So were they describing Nibiru, or simply natural disasters filtered through a cosmic worldview? And this is precisely where AI begins complicating things further, revealing that many of these ancient tablets don't merely contain dramatic narratives. They appear structured more like practical survival records. But let's set that aside momentarily, because another piece of this story remains equally puzzling even today: the Sumerian king list. Their king list, basically an ancient document recording who ruled and for how long, doesn't exactly kick off with guys sitting on thrones for 40 years before calling it quits. No, the very first king, Elulim, supposedly held power for 28,800 years. The one after him, Dumuzid, reigned for 36,000. Now jump ahead through the list, and the later rulers governed for far more reasonable stretches, hundreds of years rather than thousands. But even that isn't exactly ordinary. Mainstream scholars will tell you these are purely symbolic figures, meant to convey divine authority, basically saying our king was so great he ruled practically forever. But others think something completely different was happening, and that's where the rabbit hole swings wide open. Could these kings have literally been hybrids, part human, part something else entirely, specifically connected to the Anunnaki? Now let's throw some archaeology into the mix. There's this burial site, Queen Puabi's tomb, dated to around 2600 BC. When researchers opened it, they discovered a skull that didn't quite line up with expectations. And no, it wasn't the kind of cranial reshaping seen in certain ancient cultures, where the head is bound deliberately to achieve a particular shape. This skull was naturally elongated. That simply isn't supposed to happen. Nearby, they also found skeletal remains belonging to someone who stood over 7 feet tall, which within Sumerian populations is extraordinarily uncommon. Even by today's standards, that's rare. So were these simply random genetic outliers? Or were they physical evidence of something far more significant? Now here's where the ancient writings get even stranger. The Sumerians were deeply preoccupied with bloodline purity. Again and again throughout their texts, they referenced the seed of Anu, and they weren't composing poetry for its own sake. sake. These people maintained dynastic marriages, strict ceremonial practices, and formal laws, all carefully structured to protect a very specific lineage. And the remarkable thing is, this wasn't exclusive to them. The very same idea surfaces across cultures throughout the ancient world. Egyptian pharaohs declared themselves descendants of the gods. Inca rulers said they were born of the sun itself. Even Tibetan Dalai Lamas are selected as living reincarnations of divine beings. But the Sumerians, they may well have been the first civilization to actually put all of this into writing. And this is where things start getting complicated. The Sumerian language is packed with words that carry multiple meanings, depending entirely on context. Take the word me, for instance. It can refer to a divine ruling. It can describe a cultural idea. It can even point to a tangible physical object. That ambiguity has fueled some pretty extraordinary interpretations over the decades. Zechariah Sitchin, for one, argued that certain texts described objects loaded with tremendous energy. One of his headline claims was that tablet VA243 was actually an ancient star map, except, well, that one has since been thoroughly debunked. Scholars confirmed it is simply a straightforward dedication inscription, nothing remotely resembling an astronomical chart. But the Sumerians did not only leave behind fascinating myths and clay tablets filled with stories of gods and rulers. They left behind warnings, deeply serious ones. You might assume they were simply describing one great flood or some singular catastrophic event, but that is not what the texts are saying. The Sumerians spoke of cycles, of recurring patterns, of entire eras of flourishing that would rise and then crumble, again and again. It is written directly into their celestial records. And here is where things take a genuinely strange turn. Artificial intelligence is now drawing connections between those ancient patterns and real-world climate catastrophes we already have documented evidence for. Consider the 4.2 kilo-year drought, civilizations collapsed entirely, or the sudden unraveling of the Akkadian Empire, marked by widespread famine and mass movement of populations. We have solid scientific data confirming these events occurred, yet in the tablets they are described in an entirely different kind of language. Crimson skies, a darkened sun, stars that seem to consume the earth below, rivers flowing in reverse. For generations, scholars largely dismissed all of this as poetic expression, ancient people reaching for dramatic metaphors to make sense of natural disasters. But here's where things take a fascinating turn. AI systems are now identifying these ancient accounts as potential descriptions of actual astronomical phenomena, which opens up a rather significant question. Were the Sumerians observing something in the skies that we've since lost track of? And just when you think things couldn't get any stranger, it turns out the Sumerians had their very own divine council, a full-on League of Gods. And this time, I'm not referring to the Anunnaki, that's just the outer layer. Peel it back and you discover a pantheon that could hold its own against any modern fantasy world. Seriously, they had deities for storms, healing, the moon, scribes, even for particular winds, and those are only the ones we've managed to uncover. So let's begin with the most powerful figure of all, Enlil. This being wasn't simply a deity of wind. According to his myth, he was the one who divided the heavens from the earth. That's literally how his story opens. And here's the remarkable part. Enlil was considered so profoundly sacred that even fellow gods refused to meet his gaze. He governed from an enormous temple known as Akur, located in Nippur, and essentially controlled everything from farming and kingship to the fundamental laws of existence. We're talking about supreme cosmic authority. Now, Enki was a very different character. The trickster, god of freshwater wisdom and creation. Essentially, the kind of cosmic engineer you'd want firmly in your corner. His tale involves overthrowing his own father, reshaping the world, and allegedly granting humanity both intellect and magical ability. He was, in many ways, the ancient world's version of a brilliant inventor. And here's an interesting detail. His sister Gadamdug served as a goddess of healing and fertility. Not exactly a familiar name today, but in her time she was called upon during childbirth and wellness ceremonies, a gentle, nurturing presence, often overshadowed by the more dramatic myths around her. Then the narrative takes a bolder turn. Enter Inanna, later called Ishtar. This goddess embodied love, conflict, political authority, and completely unapologetic ambition. Her symbol was an 8-pointed star, and her mythology, well, that's something else entirely. One tale describes her journeying into the realm of the dead to seize control of her sister's kingdom. She met her end there, suspended on a hook, and was only restored to the living by offering her own husband in exchange. Certain scholars believe the entire story was an early attempt to explain the turning of seasons, the stillness of winter, and the renewal of spring, but the mythology doesn't end there. Utu, known also as Shamash, was the deity of the sun, born from Nana and Ningal. His role went far beyond simply providing light. He embodied justice and law, casting truth into the open as he made his daily journey across the heavens. And his sister Nana, goddess of the moon, was so deeply honored that one of the earliest known writers in all of history served as a high priestess within her following. And Hedwana was that priestess, composing hymns in devotion to a lunar goddess. The very first named author in the historical record was a woman writing in praise of the moon. That is genuinely remarkable, and quietly present within the myths is Ninmah. She rarely gets mentioned, yet she served as Enlil's scribe, acting as a divine librarian, a midwife at the dawn of humanity's creation, and a healer of great importance. Consider what that means. A goddess who functioned essentially as the guardian of all cosmic knowledge. She absolutely deserves far more recognition. Now things grow even more layered. The Sky Father was regarded as the ultimate forefather, at times depicted as a celestial bull. His companion Kai, the Mother of Earth, carried a myth so daring it may have been shared quietly rather than proclaimed aloud. Their coming together with their own offspring, Enlil, was said to have brought all earthly life into being. Some interpret this not simply as a story of fertility, but as a grand metaphor for how all life is woven together. And then there is Anzu, an enormous thunderbird, who boldly made off with the tablets of destiny, taking them directly from Enlil. These were no mere symbols, they were actual objects carrying divine authority. The effort to recover them grew into the stuff of enduring legend. Depending on which version reached your ears, it was either Ninurta or Marduk who ultimately brought the great bird down. But here is the thing. By the time the Babylonians introduced their grand creation myth, the Enuma Elish, the Sumerian divine roster had swelled to over 300 deities, and the further researchers dig into those ancient clay tablets, the more names keep surfacing. Dozens of gods are barely recognized today. Many sit in museum archives, only partially translated, their full stories still unknown. And here's a fascinating theory worth considering. Certain scholars believe there may have been local deities connected to very specific natural features. One god for a particular spring, another for reeds growing in a marsh, perhaps even for individual winds, which means every new fragment uncovered could reveal an entirely forgotten divine figure. Now, before you assume this is simply a tidy collection of ancient tales, here's where things get genuinely complicated. Unlocking Sumerian myth isn't like opening a finished book and reading cover to cover. It's far more like attempting to complete a puzzle when half the pieces are simply gone. Most of what we understand today comes from clay tablets, and a great many of them are broken or worn down by centuries of time. Scholars must stitch together a single story using fragments discovered in entirely different locations, sometimes written hundreds of years apart. And even when they manage that, the language itself presents serious challenges. Cuneiform writing is remarkably complex. A single syllable alone could be carved in as many as 25 distinct ways. Factor in the shifts between Sumerian, Akkadian, and Neo-Babylonian dialects, plus the poetic language and layered metaphors throughout, and every translation turns into a high-stakes exercise in careful interpretation. And here's something that makes it even more striking. For quite a long time, Western scholars dismissed many of these deities as irrelevant, primitive, or merely regional oddities. Entire divine figures were overlooked or placed in the wrong categories entirely. Even the celebrated myth of Inanna's descent into the realm below wasn't fully assembled until the 1900s, and it took scholars decades more to reconstruct its complete arc. Were the Sumerians hidden observers of science, or perhaps witnesses to something far beyond ordinary explanation? The further we look, the more unsettling it becomes. Are we seeing clearly, or is today's perspective warping what was once understood? So what do you believe those radiant gems and crackling staffs truly represented? Share your take in the comments below. I read each one personally. And if you enjoy content that keeps you second-guessing everything, go ahead and subscribe. There's plenty more on the way.